I would like to congratulate the Global Energy Alliance and the Observer Research Foundation for launching their first edition of the Energy Transition Dialogue. The energy transition is a multi-year, even a multi-decadal process, and one that will need to evolve constantly and continuously. Therefore, continuous intellectual engagement on this issue is indispensable. In particular, India being the most populous nation in the world, its progress in energy transition will be critical for the world. Equally, its challenges and needs in order to accomplish this transition are important for the world also to support. To set the context, it is useful for us to understand how India wants this transition to pan out. While there is a lot of buzz for an immediate shift from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable or green energy, there are some aspects which are often overlooked. India is still a developing country and we are yet to reach our peak emissions. The scale of energy requirements cannot be met with renewables alone. Fossil fuels will continue to play a major role in the short term, and we expect them to make a slow exit in the medium term as we gradually phase in renewable sources of energy while also addressing the issues related to them with technology and financial resources. For example, the intermittency of renewable energy and thus the need for adequate battery storage is yet to be figured out, as is the huge cost of battery storage at the present juncture, making vast shift to renewable technologies uncertain. There is also the issue of grid stability with renewable energy. Therefore, India is correctly focused on a gradual phasing in of renewable energy instead of phasing out fossil fuels. The country is already on the right track to achieve the target of having 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based energy sources by 2030. As per the latest data, 43.75% of India's installed capacity is from non-fossil fuel sources. Renewable energy accounts for nearly 31%, 11% is accounted for by hydro, and 1.76% by nuclear energy. India is just 7.25% away from its NDC target. The consistency and steadfastness with which India is approaching the target is also recognized by others. The September 2023 report by the International Finance Corporation titled Blended Finance for India states that India has significantly developed its climate actions, resulting in a path to achieving its NDC well before 2030. It is the only G20 nation in line with 2 degrees centigrade warming compared to its fair share contribution to climate action, states the IFSC report. The Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India have consistently acted on various policy measures to improve finance flows into green projects, creating depth in the green bond market by issuing sovereign green bonds amounting to rupees 16,000 crores or 160 billion rupees, equivalent to $2 billion, for mobilizing resources for green public infrastructure projects. Through the framework for sovereign green bonds and RBI's framework for acceptance of green deposits, the potential areas that would get covered under green investments have been identified, providing the clarity required to business and financial institutions. The Securities and Exchange Board of India's Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting, BRSR, which was made mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies, is catalyzing the move towards green investments and responsible behavior of big firms. We all know that incentives and reinforcements for responsible behavior have a long history, with SEBI being one of the early adopters of sustainability reporting for listed entities. India's production-linked incentive program across various sectors has gone a long way in meeting the energy saving and emission reduction targets through various PLI cycles. These sectors include high efficiency solar PV modules, solar photovoltaic cells, and advanced chemistry cell or ACC batteries, among others. So, the Indian government has recently undertaken also actions to ensure the supply of critical minerals for renewable energy systems through amendments to the MMDR Act by joining the Mineral Security Partnership. It is evident that India has taken actions on multiple fronts to meet its own self-defined target of meeting at least 50% of its installed capacity through non-fossil fuel. Energy transition, therefore, sets out a challenging pathway ahead. Access to finance and technology at reasonable terms is a concern, especially given that much of India's ambitious NDCs has been so far met by domestic resource mobilization. I am not going to go into the estimates of financing required for India and other developing countries in the coming years because these estimates are widely dispersed. In any case, they are in trillions, while countries are discussing the billions that will be freed up by balance sheet optimization in multilateral development banks. We can and must do better. But in any case, energy transition is not just about mobilizing resources, important as it is. In general, in development economics, nationally or internationally, outlays do not translate into outcomes. Energy transition will be no exception. Therefore, we need to focus on other dimensions apart from financial resources mobilization. A fact that will increasingly determine the pace and viability of this concern with green transition is the access to rare earth elements and critical minerals, without which green technologies cannot be scaled up. The problem is that there is oligopolistic control over the mining and processing of these minerals, adding a big element of uncertainty to this transition. In particular, I have been asked to touch upon three key principles that businesses and investors should consider to enhance energy security within the context of energy transition. I will first set out high-level principles and then speak about the principles that businesses and investors must keep in mind. For example, in his December 2022 article written for the IMF blog, Daniel Ergin concluded his piece by stating, I quote, "The energy crisis of the early 70s, the 80s, and the early 2000s all had their challenges, but none were so intertwined with other emergencies like a war in Europe, climate change, and a global pandemic." Unquote. Therefore, the first step is to acknowledge the complexity of the situation, which may surpass immediate human intellectual capabilities to solve it swiftly. Consequently, humility becomes the starting point, enabling us to construct a comprehensive solution methodically, piece by piece, rather than seeking quick fix approaches. Second principle. The absence of a miraculous or silver bullet solution is evident. In other words, there is no ideal scenario that can fully address the complex challenges we face. Instead, we should focus on navigating and adapting to second and third best alternatives which consciously avoid subpar solutions. This principle underscores the necessity of adopting a discerning approach where we strive for the most optimal solutions available while remaining vigilant against settling for inferior alternatives. There are no corner solutions possible, and public policy is about recognizing, accepting, and acting on the trade-offs. The third principle revolves around redemption or initiating action from our current state of helplessness with respect to climate change and energy transition. It entails recognizing that countries must take ownership of the climate problem instead of being coerced into addressing it by others. Attempts to hector or exerting excessive pressure that more advanced nations usually do on developing countries will be counterproductive. Rather than fostering positive outcomes, promoting a cooperative and collaborative atmosphere is crucial for countries to willingly embrace their responsibilities and actively engage in meaningful climate action, unencumbered by external pressure or excessive criticism. Now, let me turn to the principles that businesses and investors must keep in mind. First, there are no corner solutions, as I said earlier. Only constrained optimization is possible. In other words, there is no first best world. Second, sequencing is important. Countries have to ensure energy security first through reliable and affordable energy before they contemplate energy transition. Short-term matters for people and economies, and there is no energy transition without economic growth. Second principle, investors in general want their investments in developing countries to be de-risked by public sector. That is all right. But if their investments are de-risked, their return expectations also must be lower accordingly. One cannot have the cake and eat it too. Investors must actually see energy transition as a win-win opportunity and not as a win-lose game between them and their host countries. The economic and social backlash will be counterproductive if greed dominates the creation of public goods. The third principle acknowledges the market mechanism's limitation to achieving emissions mitigation. Market discipline exists, but in theory. If financial markets could always exert discipline on market participants and did exert price discipline on investors, there will never be price bubbles and burst. But the point is the market mechanism in reality is pro-cyclical. Hence, it foments instability rather than being a force for stability. The market mechanism in financial markets is not an efficient price discovery mechanism. It mutes and distorts the price signal. That is the empirical evidence. Therefore, we must remember, while it will be tempting to promote and push through capital market liberalization in countries in the name of attracting private capital for energy transition, since investment needs are huge, history has plenty of caution for us. Capital market developments and evolution in countries usually keep pace with economic evolution. Seldom do they precede economic evolution. When forced, then the economies will become over-financialized and macroeconomic consequences follow if capital market evolution tries to run ahead of economic evolution. The fourth principle follows the third. The importance of public investment must be acknowledged and recognized. This is also consistent with the fifth principle that follows a sense of This is also consistent with the earlier principle that I had mentioned, a sense of ownership by countries. Globally, there is a reason why transformational projects such as post-World War II reconstruction, space exploration, the development of the internet, and the highways construction projects in the USA in the 60s were all handled and executed by the public sector based on government funding or funding by public authorities, domestic, international or multilateral. Public investment in carbon sequestration, carbon sinks, battery storage technologies and green hydrogen will obviate problems with intellectual property rights and help assert the global public nature of such solutions. Finally, economic growth and development are not opposed to climate security but are key to its eventual success. Letting countries own their climate agenda is also tied to this need to foster economic growth. Without economic growth, countries would want to abandon the climate agenda rather than own them. Economic growth is critical because it ensures availability of domestic resources needed to address climate change effectively. When countries lack resources, they become reliant on external sources, which can lead to macroeconomic instability and consequent vulnerabilities. In such cases, funding can also be weaponized. That is the other risk that countries face when they depend too much on foreign sources of funding, whether private or public. Therefore, it is important for investors to support countries in prioritizing economic growth rather than penalizing them for doing so. By fostering sustainable economic development, countries can strengthen their resilience, enhance their capacity to address climate issues, and reduce their dependence on external resources, which can only play a role at the margin. The best place to start to solve the energy transition challenge is in our minds. And it starts with humility. That is my final, and in fact, it is also the first principle. Thank you. I wish the first edition and future editions of the Energy Transition Dialogue all success, and wish the rest of the dialogue a very fruitful and constructive engagement for all participants. Thank you very much.